Well, today's the moment of truth. I've refretted the fretboard here, and it's time to figure out the final neck angle and glue the neck back to the body. And so what I've done here is I've put the neck back into the dovetail, and I've taken the bridge here and I've jacked up the pole pieces. And the reason I'm doing this is I want to make sure that I have plenty of room for adjustment on the bridge when I'm setting the neck angle. When this originally came in, the pole pieces were all the way down, which meant that if you wanted to lower the action further, there was nowhere to go. And so what I can do is I can do a combination square and just sort of align it this way. And you can see possibly here that there's a gap. And so what I'm looking for is to set the angle in such a way that it's approximately good at this point. And then what that should allow me to do is, once this is set in place, then I'll be able to, raise this a little bit more or lower it a little more, depending on, the action that I'd like to get from, this specific neck. And so when I do that, I'm holding down kind of the proper angle right now, and I can see that there's a bit of a gap. You can't really see it too much on this side, so it's not too bad. On this side of the guitar, there's actually a little bit of a gap at the heel. And, this doesn't surprise me. As I've talked through this project, the one thing that's really kind of stuck out and one thing that I've been trying to change is the fact that the fretboard was actually tilted to one section. And so if you're thinking about, over 70 years, the neck has settled and bent a little bit. The fact that I'm kind of putting it back so that it's parallel to the top here, I'm not surprised that you're seeing a little bit of a wiggle. What I'm going to do about that is an open question. It appears to me that the gap is about, I don't know, a 1/16 of an inch, maybe even smaller than that. And so it's not that I'm going to want to pack the whole thing with glue and hope that it goes away, but I am going to use hide glue, set the angle the way I want, and then depending on what it looks like afterwards, I'm going to consider, if I go back in and fill that gap somehow with a sliver of wood or some other method. And so what I'm going to do now is go get my bottle of hide glue, go get some clamps, and do a dry run to see, how I'm going to secure this to give the neck plenty of time to actually dry. And one of the clamps I'm going to use is one of these F clamps. It has two adjustments here, one for the kind of regular height, and then you can dial it in the amount of pressure you want to put. And what I want to do is set the clamp up in such a way that I'm, even with kind of the middle right around where the dovetail is. And I'm going to press down actually on the frets because really there's no other option. I might put a piece of wood here. We'll see. But ultimately, all I want to do is just put enough pressure so that the neck doesn't move. I certainly don't want to crank it down at all. Being an acoustic instrument, this isn't the sort of situation where force is, the way you can kind of take care of everything. And so, at least as a dry run, if I put this back up here, that's not too bad. The gap, as I said, is present here on the treble side. It's a little bit of a gap here on the bass side. As I feel, there isn't even if I clamp it this way, it doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of give where I can both push the neck backwards and still keep the same angle. The other thing to keep in mind here is that unlike a fixed bridge guitar, you can move this bridge to set the intonation, and so this is a little bit of an easier thing where, you know, dealing with the gap here is more cosmetic. We don't have to worry about the scale length per se, because if this neck is a little further out than it used to be, we can bring the bridge a little closer, or, you know, if it's somehow, you know, were to be a little further in than it used to be, we can move the bridge. And so this actually looks pretty good. I'm gonna put a towel underneath here, just to make sure that the finish doesn't have any, you know, negative reaction. I feel like I should put a piece of wood there. Last thing I want to do is dent the frets too much, and also, you know, putting a caul of some kind will help distribute the pressure a little bit. But that feels like the right neck angle. If I move it, yeah, that still gives me, you know, a lot more room to go both up and down on the bridge. And so there's definitely formulas for figuring this out. Had I thought a little bit more about this process before tackling this, and had I not broken the heel, you know, I might have taken a much more mathematical approach to it. But I don't mind this approach right here, as, you know, logically, you know, as long as I'm giving myself space to make that bridge both have up and down adjustment, should be able to set the action in a reasonable way. So that looks pretty good. Last thing I want to do is just kind of, oops, let's pay attention to make sure I don't drop the bridge. But yeah, and so, you know, this, having it this way, the neck would also be relatively flattened out, you know, compared to its original state. And so as a dry run, I think I'm actually only going to go with one clamp. The dovetail actually fits in so that there shouldn't be a whole lot of movement in and out. And so I think I'm just going to go for it and hope for the best. Got my prep materials here. I got two smallish pieces of wood that I'll use as clamping cauls. Just a cheap paintbrush that I'm going to use to smooth out the glue. Yeah, it's time to do it. As I mentioned, I'm going to use hide glue. Hide glue comes apart with a little bit of heat and water, and so on the off chance that I actually mess this up, it'll give me a second shot. Or, you know, 70 more years from now, if someone has to reset the neck again, then they'll have an easier chance of doing that. And so I'm going to put some glue both all over the dovetail, I guess that's the mortise, and this will be the tenon, on both sides. I'm going to clamp it down, and then I have a cup of water over on the other side, which I'll use to clean up any of the squeeze out. You know, certainly don't want to make this a big sloppy mess. Hide glue has, you know, the consistency of kind of rubber cement, which is good in some cases because it helps with kind of the gap filling properties. But it's also kind of sticky and gooey, so that's why I'm using the paintbrush here. You know, with wood glue, or with, you know, yellow wood glue, you can kind of smooth out with your finger and just wipe it off. But this is a little bit more gooey, and so use a paintbrush to, you know, just make sure that the surfaces are good and coated. That's a decent amount of glue there, and so now I'll just put a little bit more glue on the dovetail itself, and then we'll clamp it together. So there you go. You can see that, I've got the glue spread out all over the dovetail here. As I mentioned, the consistency of this is sort of like rubber cement, and so it's not going to drip everywhere. And then the same thing, I've got a nice even coating all over my joint. So now here's the point of no return. Not seeing any squeeze out yet, which is good. Use this bigger one as my clamp and caul underneath. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my F clamp. There's a chunk of wood here that the neck connects to, and so I'm not going to be pushing against necessarily the hollow part of the body, but there's actually, a pretty solid neck block in here. That's what I'm going to use as kind of my area to push it together. So that's not too bad. The neck is, again, parallel to the top here. Not seeing too much squeeze out, or oh, there's a little bit. Really, I'm just putting enough pressure, not wrench, really, ratcheting this down. Seems reasonable from this side. Like I said, there's a little bit of glue squeeze out, and you can see here at the bottom, the heel, there's a gap, which is, a little bigger than I really would have hoped, but we'll see about the cosmetics of that a little bit later. And this side, you can see it as well. So yeah, I think that's about it. I'm going to sit down in the shop maybe, I don't know, 10, 20 more minutes, do a few other things, make sure it looks good. But I'm going to let this set for hours and potentially even days. I don't want to, think about even, putting any strings on this before this glue is good and cured. So we'll let this sit and come back and see what the result is. The glue's had 24 hours to dry, and the neck joint is super solid. As I mentioned, when I was gluing this up, there was a little bit of a gap at the bottom. It's probably easier to see this way, where the bottom of the neck heel isn't touching the body. And the more I look at it, I think what happened was, when I was trying to get the neck off, I actually bent the wood, and so this piece is, when it broke off and I glued it back, there was a little bit too much, I don't know, too much elbow grease to try and do this. And so what I've done is I've started making a little shim this morning out of a piece of 16th inch cherry. And what I'm going to do is I'll work on this a little more, but what I'll do is slide this in here, glue it up, and then hopefully, a majority of that gap will be filled. All I'm trying to do here is, have as much wood-to-wood contact as possible. I don't want to pack, the joint with lots of glue or something, wood filler, something that would crack later. The other thing about putting a piece of wood in here is that, as this guitar, goes out and is being played again, there won't be this leverage point where there's no wood behind this part of the joint. You can actually, snap the neck. At least that's the theory. And so I'm gonna just take this, trim it up a little bit more, use my hide glue, and then let it sit all day while I'm at work. Of course, I tempted fate by trimming this with my bandsaw, and I broke this little wedge. But I'm actually not too concerned about that. Since these are both going to be shims for the side, I'll just glue them in separately. At the bottom, there's usually a decorative piece as well that covers the bottom of the neck heel. I've already taken it off this guitar when I was going to reset the neck. And so when I put it back on there, that will cover the bottom joint. The two, wedges will cover the sides. What I did there was wanted to trim. I realized that, the way I was jamming glue in there, had that dried, there would be a lot of glue when I went back to try and, trim that piece flush. And so instead I, roughly trimmed it flush. I'll show this to start with, so that when I do go back and clean that up, we're just going to take a sliver off to smooth it out. All right, so I'll let that dry for a few hours, get nice and set, and then I'll trim up the shim, and then see what gaps might remain and how I might fill them with black or brown CA glue, to really just try and make the seam look as seamless as possible. The shims have been left overnight to dry, and as I went back yesterday, I put a little bit of black CA glue in the cracks to do a little filling. You can see it turned slightly white, which does frequently happen with CA glue. But for right now, the neck is stable. I've got my shims in. I've got the beginning of filling the gap done. And so I'm going to end the video here. The next step is actually going to be to put together this whole thing, see how it sets up and plays. And then after that, I can kind of consider if there's any more cosmetic work I'm going to do, or if that's going to be it. So thanks for watching, and hope you're as excited as I am to see how this finishes up.